So today's subject is on the dark night of the soul. And the dark night of the soul, to make it as simple as possible, I've already explained to you throughout my lectures that spiritual life is about remembering God and forgetting self. To remember God and forgetting self. So when you are unable to remember God, or when you are unable to connect with God, but you have forgotten self, that is the dark night of the soul. So the dark night of the soul is the situation of ego death without having the comfort of being connected with mind. It's not something that is uncommon. All those who are very serious about spiritual life and they progress in spiritual life soon develop rapidly, in fact, I would say, develop a detachment from the world. And when they develop a detachment from the world, over a period of time, they develop a detachment from themselves as well. So what really happens is that they experience a depersonalization. They experience what is called an ego death. Classically and typically, this ego death occurs when on the path of spiritual life, one experiences a life-changing situation. And what do we mean by a life-changing situation? It is a major disruption or triggering event in your life over something, and it is something over which you have no control, or you have tried to make an effort to have control, but it doesn't work. It could be death of a loved one, death of a spouse, death of a child. It could be a divorce. It could be a very serious financial loss. It could be loss of your job. It could mean inability to progress in your career. It could be a major illness, perhaps even a major illness that gives you intimation of death. It could mean a betrayal by people whom you depend upon. You could find that people around you are demonstrating injustice or abuse to you. Any or all of these things, or a combination of them, result in the triggering event of the belief that perhaps God has abandoned. So you feel that for God you have abandoned the world, and having abandoned the world for God, you find that now God has abandoned you. So you are left with neither this nor that. You are the dhobi ka kutta, na ghar ka na ghat ka. And in this situation of abandonment, in this situation of being let down, in this situation of finding no relief or finding no recourse to the misfortune that you're going through, maybe you start thinking that maybe there is no God. Maybe all this is just a mind game. Maybe this is a con job which has been put on me. टोपी लगाया है. Because where is the happiness? Where is the bliss? Where is the peace of mind? In fact, Krishna says in the Bhagawad Geeta that the last chapter, that wherever there is Krishna, master of mystics, and Arjuna, his devotee, there is victory, there is wealth, there is power. Where is all that? Maybe I made a mistake. Perhaps there is no spiritual life. And this is the beginning of the dark night of the soul. And then comes the despair and the hopelessness. And in this despair and hopelessness, you feel that the life that you have been leading so far has been completely meaningless. As you start sinking deeper and deeper and deeper, and you may become emotionally numb, you find that you lost friends and family. You may find that you have become isolated. Perhaps you have no one to turn to. And while it may be the darkest hours that one faces, it also gives you a valuable instruction that is meant for all people on the path of spiritual life to bring about a complete and absolute purification of the self. The story of the dark night of the soul is actually the result of a poem by Saint John of the Cross, which describes the journey of the soul to a mystical union with God. It's called dark night because God is unknowable. And since God is unknowable, is inconceivable. It is so, so, so difficult to know Him. At this time, if you turn to the Bhagavad Geeta, you will find the answer and the solution on how to emerge from the dark night of the soul. Because Arjuna is also undergoing the dark night of the soul. He is detached from the world. He wants to run away from the battlefield. He wants to abandon his duty. And in the 12th chapter, first text, Arjuna asks Krishna, Arjuna Vacha, Evam Satvata Yukta Ye Bhaktasvam Paryupasate Ye Chapya Aksharam Avyaktam Tesham Ke Yoga Vittamana. Arjuna asks Krishna, the devotee asks God, what is more perfect? Who is considered to be more perfect? Who is more intimately united with you? Who is properly engaged in your devotional service? One who worships you in this form of Sri Krishna, or one who worships you in the inconceivable absolute, ineffable, unmanifest. So when you have been detached from the world and at the same time you have no connection with an inconceivable God, you are thrown into a bottomless pit. And when you reach that bottom, you should read this verse, 12.2 of the Bhagawad Geeta. Shri Bhagavan Vacha, and the Supreme Lord said, Maya Veshya Manoye Mam Nitya Yukta Upasate Shraddhaya Paryopetas Te Me Yuktatmo Matah. Maya Veshya Manoye Mam Nitya Yukta Upasate. The Blessed Lord said, he whose mind is fixed on my personal form of Sri Krishna, always worshipping me with great and transcendental faith. Shraddhaya Parayopetas Te Me Yuktatma Matah. That person is considered to be most perfect, most intimately united with me. Because those who worship God without form, those who worship God in the inconceivable aspect, those who worship God in the unmanifest, those who worship God in the ineffable aspect, where you cannot even speak of Him, those who worship God in the all-pervading form, less form, they will feel offended because they will not realize that this message that is being given is a message for those who are truly in that state of the dark night of the soul. So Krishna says, Ye tva aksharam anirdesham avyaktam paryupasate sarvatra gam achintyam cha kutastam achalam dhruvam sanniyamya indriya gramam sarvatra samabuddhayah te prapnuvanti mameva sarvabhuta hite ratah. But those who worship the unmanifest, that which lies beyond the perception of the senses, the all-pervading the inconceivable, ineffable, immovable, inconceivable. By controlling various senses and being equally disposed towards all, such persons dedicated to the constant service in the welfare of all, eventually, at last, attain me. So did I make a mistake by worshipping God without form? It's not a mistake. But even if it is true, it is a path full of sorrow. In chapter 12, text 5, Krishna says, Kleshodhiktarstesham avyakta sakta chetasam avyakta hi gatir dukham dehavad viravapyate. For those whose minds are attached to worshipping the unmanifest, inconceivable, impersonal, ineffable aspect of the Lord, the path is full of sorrow, klesha, trouble, sorrow, difficulty, which one experiences as the dark night of the soul. To make progress in this discipline is very difficult because you are using your prakriti in the worship, because you are using Bhumi apo nalo vayur kham manobuddhirevacha ahankara ityame binna prakriti ashtada. You are using your body, you are using your mind, you are using your intelligence, you are using your sense of self. And all these things you must divinize. All these things must be completely transformed and soaked in devotion. And how can you soak them with devotion? When you insist on worshipping God without form, without manifestation, without the ability to express anything about Him, without the ability to imagine Him, can't do that. It's very difficult. It's a path full of sorrow for one who's embodied. It doesn't matter what religion you follow. You will find very simply that regardless of the religion, if you do not have a personal connection with God in form, your path will always be more difficult. And even worse, what if you have given up the world? What if you have abandoned your duties? What if you have abandoned your swadharma? Being misguided by other anchorites, by other sannyasis, by other renunciates, being misguided by them. If you have abandoned the world, then, my friends, what would be your situation? And Krishna has already spoken in the Bhagavad Geeta. And Krishna also tells you that to abandon the world brings great sorrow for one who is not already united with God. Krishna says, Sannyasas karma yogasya nihashreyasya karavabhav tayostu karma sannyasat karma yogo vishishyate. Both renouncing the world externally and working with devotion can both help you on the spiritual path. But between the two, working in the world in a spirit of devotion is by far superior. Sanyasastu mahabhao dukhamaptum yogatah yoga yukta munir brahma na chirena adhigacchati. If you renounce the world externally without having attained union with God, then you will get only sorrow. One way to get sorrow on the spiritual path is to worship God without form, as the unmanifest, as the inconceivable, as the ineffable, as the all-pervading, as the formless. That is one way you are guaranteed to get dark night of the soul. The other way to get the dark night of the soul, the guarantee is that if you renounce the world externally, without having attained union with God, what happens? Krishna says, Dukkham aptum ayogatah. You get only sorrow. So, two mistakes to be avoided in spiritual life if you want to make your path free from falling into the dark night of the soul. One is to have a personal relationship with God in a form. Because kleshodiktarastesham avyakta sakta chetasam avyakta hidati dukkam dehavadviravapyate. You get only sorrow if you persist in trying to worship God only without form. I don't say that God is not formless, or that He is unmanifest, or that He is not inconceivable, or that He is not ineffable. He is all these things and more. But the path to attain Him is to worship Him with form, to establish a personal relationship with Him, because you are limited and the instruments you are using of Prakriti need a form, need a name, need activities, need a pastime, need a message, need a book or scripture. All of these. And the other way that you can be guaranteed to fall into this dark night of the soul is to abandon the world. And having abandoned the world, of course, unfortunately, many of the people who claim to have abandoned the world have only changed their clothes. They have their attachments, among their disciples and followers. They have their attachments, even attachments they're not supposed to have. And we read about them in the newspapers again and again and again. Because unfortunately, they are getting dukkham aptuma yogatah. They have abandoned the world without having attained union with God. So therefore, it is so important for us to realize, one, that we should worship God with form, and two, instead of abandoning the world externally, we should engage ourselves in a spirit of sacrifice and devotion in the fulfillment of our swadharma and setting an example to the rest of society. Karmanaiva hi samsiddhim astita janakadaya lok sangraham evapi sampashyam kartum arhasi. Krishna says very clearly that you must understand God on the path where you see Him in form, where you have a personal relationship with Him, where you are totally remembering Him and thinking of Him. And in a spirit of sacrifice and devotion, you must perform your God-given duties. In the 6th chapter, 1st verse, Krishna says, Anashritah karma phalam karya karma karoti yah sa sannyasi cha yogi cha na niragnir na chakriya. One who performs his God-given duties in a spirit of sacrifice to that all-pervading Lord. He is the true yogi, he is the true sannyasi, not one who lights no fire and does no work. Indeed, your duty is given to you by God to engage your Prakriti in a spirit of devotion and sacrifice offered to Him. Our one wing of the bird, the other wing of the bird, is to keep your mind on God all the time. So that yat karoshi, yad ashnasi, yat juhosi, dadasi, yat tapasyasi, kaunteya tat kurushva madarpanam. So that, my friends, always think of me, become my devotee, offer homage unto me. Do everything for me. Whatever you eat, whatever you offer, whatever you give away, whatever charities, whatever austerities you perform, everything you do for Him. Shubha Shubha Phalairevam Moksha se Karma Bandhane Sannyasa Yoga Yuktena Vimukto Mame Vaishyasi Man Mana Bhava Mad Bhakto Madhyaji Mam Namaskaru Mame Vaishyasi Yuktevam Atmana Matkara. And if you work in the spirit of sacrifice and devotion, you will become free from both bad and good effects of your actions. And in the spirit of renunciation, you will reach the Supreme Lord and have union with Him. Always think of me, become my devotee, offer homage unto me, be completely absorbed in thoughts of me, and you will come to me without fear. So it's so important to understand and to realize that Krishna will never abandon you. Api ched sudracharo bhajate mam ananyabhak sadhureva samantavya samyak vyavasito ita Shipram bhavati dharmatma shashvat shantim nigacchati kaunteya pratijanahi name bhakti pranashyati. Even if you have performed all kinds of abominable actions, once you come upon this path, you will remain untouched. Indeed, you will become a sadhu from that moment on. And very soon you will become a dharmatma. So, Arjuna, declare it boldly that my devotee shall never perish. So there is a delay sometimes in spiritual life, but there is no denial. And when one reaches occasions of despair, of depression, of unhappiness, of sorrow, of the feeling of abandonment, maybe even of the belief that there is no God, you're not the only one. Many people have come through this. You have examples like Mother Teresa, and she suffered this dark night of the soul with minor reprieves for scores of years. There are many other saints who have had it for 40 years, 30 years. But the key is that you keep remembering God and you keep dedicating your actions to Him. Even in the Bhagavad, there is an example of Narad Muni. And Narad Muni is very attached to his mother. He is a young child, very attached to his mother. And indeed, the Supreme Lord, who always acts for the benefit of his devotees, realizing that Narad Muni was so attached to his devotees that it came between him and God, he has the mother bitten by a snake, and the snake bite kills his mother. And then Narad Muni engages continuously in worshipping God. And then God appears before him in this form. And he says, I'm revealing myself to you in this form, but you will never see me again like this. Telling him that you will enter into the dark night of the soul. But he says, wherever you go, you will chant my glories. Wherever you go, you will sing my kirtan and bhajan. Wherever you go, you will give my message. Wherever you go, you will glorify me. And thus, you will be constantly at peace and in bliss. So, to remember God and forget self is the message. Sometimes you forget self and you're not able to remember God. That is the dark night of the soul. This is known as ego death, existential crisis, crisis of faith, and so on and so forth. It doesn't matter. Because Bhagavad Gita has prepared you perfectly to establish a personal relationship with Him. He's given you a name, a form, activities to remember, a message in His book, the Bhagavad Gita. And indeed, He has commanded you to engage in the performance of your duties. Yataha pravrittir bhutanam yena sarvam idam tatam swakarmana abhyarchaya siddhim vindati manavaha. Through the performance of your God-given duties in a spirit of sacrifice to that all-pervading Lord, one attains perfection. So by worshipping God with form, doing your God-given duties as a sacrifice to Him, you will be rescued from this dark night of the soul. With this, I conclude today's session. You are welcome to ask any questions that you might have on this subject. Yes, are there any questions? Anmol, are there any questions? Anmol, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Yes, are there any questions?
Anmol, are you there?
Yes, sir. Any questions?
Yes, are there any questions? Are you there? Yes, sir. Any questions? Are there any questions? Are you there?
No questions?
No, sir.
All right.
Thank you.
Jai Shri Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hari Om.